The following program is an encore presentation.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Summer is here. Maybe that allows time to slow down, savor a good book, be more mindful readers. That's what we're doing all this week with Governor General's Literary Award-winning poet and writer, George Elliott Clarke. Giller Prize-winning authors Dr. Vincent Lam and Elizabeth Hay, and writer and novelist Thea Lim. Tonight, are there must-read books? That's next on The Agenda in the Summer.
In our final discussion, I'm sad that we're ending on the, well, I'm not sad that we're ending on this. I'm excited that we're ending on this, but I'm sad that our time together is ending. When we talk about the canons and we talk about classics, the books that we all should have read, I always feel kind of, you mentioned imposter syndrome in another conversation that we had. I feel like an imposter because a lot of the books that are in the Western canon, I only read as an adult, but I didn't study in school. So I always felt like an outsider because the schools that I went to, we didn't study those books. So Thea, is it important to read the classics?
Well, I think as an author, you always want to know who you're in conversation with, but who you're in conversation with is kind of up to you. Like obviously we know that there's all sorts of ways that works wind up being entered into history, and rarely are they through fair fashions. I myself, maybe similar to you, I had a very strange education. I went to 10 different schools before I graduated from high school. And I think in some ways, I like to think that maybe it gave me a more interesting voice. I think I probably read through 5 different types of canons, like bits and pieces of all of them. And I think it winds up meaning that the way that I think and the way that I think about literature is composed by that experience, which I'm quite proud of. I don't have imposter syndrome.
No imposter syndrome there. What about you, Liz? What do you think?
Oh, so many books I haven't read. It's just endless. If we could think of a canon as this wide, all-expansive girdle that keeps growing as we add books to it, then fine, so long as it's not inflexible, so long as there's plenty of room for new books to enter and earlier books to be discovered, rediscovered.
Does it matter that, just to build on what you were saying, Liz, does it matter when these canons were built, having this idea of they were written by certain people of a certain class? Vincent?
Well, I think there are reasons why certain books endure, and it's because they're universal in terms of the human experience. And so, to me, if I read Anna Karenina or The Great Gatsby, it doesn't interfere with my pleasure as a reader to think, well, this is written in a different time in a different social class than my own. I do think, however, that the notion that there are things which should be read in order to be positioned enough to have a voice within society or within some social class is not only silly, but it's incredibly limiting. And so if I think about the place that most people now encounter books, that's in schools. And I think schools therefore have a really difficult and challenging task in front of them, because do I think that schools should expose young readers to some of these works, which are seminal works because they're universal human value? Absolutely they should. But do they also have an obligation to expose young readers to books which are part of the conversation that's happening right now? Well, yes, they absolutely do, because to Liz's point, the canon grows, the canon shifts. And if we're going to have young readers who care about books and who care about reading, I think one of the most important things we can do is to have them read books which are written to the current cultural moment.
Well, even just some of the books, the language, we've been talking about language a lot. There's an evolution of language, and it changes so much time. Would that make having the canon irrelevant? George?
I like to think about T.S. Eliot only in this way, and that is his great essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, where he argues that basically, and he's aiming his essay at poets or would-be poets. He basically makes the argument that every poet creates his or her own canon. Now, for him, that would have meant basically the classics of Western literature. That would be his idea of how you should go about putting together a canon. On the other hand, each writer puts together the canon that he or she needs for their own purposes. So, for instance, and coming back to Vincent's discussion of schools, the place where this question becomes really fraught is, of course, with university syllabi and with departments of English in high schools about which books exactly are you going to teach, because of course there's a dual purpose for teaching these books. It's to encourage moral reflection, encourage good citizenship, as well as enjoyment of great writing, and so on. But an example of the problems that can arise occurred for me in my last course as a PhD student candidate at Queen's University in 1991. A visiting professor put together a course on the Southern U.S. novel. And I was so eager to take that class because I thought, okay, great. Finally, here I am, my last course as a university student. We're going to encounter some Black American authors. This is going to be great. Then the first day, I show up, and the professor delivers the course outline, the syllabus. There's not a single Black author. This is 1991, not a single Black author of the American South on that syllabus. So, of course, I stupidly questioned the professor. Sir,
But you're in
me,
university, you're allowed to question your professor.
No,
right?
but stupidly.
Stupidly, okay.
Because this is the professor who is going to carry a little bit of a grudge if someone were to challenge his well-constructed syllabus. So I did ask the question, like, where's Richard Wright, for instance? Where's Zora Neale Hurston? Where's Jean Toomer? And his answer, they're not good enough. They're not good enough. Now, for him, that might have been an adequate response. But of course, this argument about who is worthy to be taught is, in fact, a very political question in the end. Yes. And when I distributed my own syllabus for the same class, which got me in trouble with the guy, but anyway, just so the other students in the class would know, well, here are some Black American authors from the South that you could be interested in reading. So the question of canon formation is inescapable because we all form our own canons as writers. We all do. I mean, in my home library, I've got my favorite writers that I go to for my inspiration and to be reminded about the shape of my own efforts in literature. You know, it's a very small list of writers that I enshrine in special bookcases. You're crying out loud, right? But those are my peers. I shouldn't say peers, but these are my mentors. Is a better way to put it, in terms of instructing me and how I might want to proceed. In the end, and I'll shut up in a moment because I still have to read one poem, but I will just say that I think there's always a debate and a division between the need to try to tell everybody in a particular culture, y'all should know these books in particular, but then the far more democratizing need to ensure that other voices are also heard in order to have a stimulating and inspiring literary culture.
So speaking to your point, I'm older than you are. And when I was studying literature as an English student of English literature back in the 1970s, it drove me nuts that the literature department divided everything into major and minor. And then unspoken was the less than minor. And in the less than minor, again, unspoken, really, but were the women, the Canadians, you know. And that has changed so radically. It really, I mean,
Why
this
has it changed?
Why has it changed? Because the world has changed. The world has changed, and you know, Canadian writing for one exploded and keeps exploding in different directions, and that kind of condescension. Well, maybe it still exists. You know, I don't live in academia. But
what both your stories make me think of is when I was in graduate school and an instructor told me that The Color Purple wasn't a work of art as a novel because it made that instructor feel bad about himself as a man. I think what's there. Well, exactly. It says something about his manhood, and that was what I was going to say. I don't think there's anything wrong with a canon as long as it's clear to students and to readers that a canon is a living thing.
Yes.
And we learn as much about the list makers as we do about the list itself.
What do we learn about the list makers?
That they were maybe not comfortable in being men is what you just suggested. But I think what were they willing to accept? You know, in what ways did these works that, if we are talking about works of art, they are always dangerous, but at the same time they were not so dangerous that they, you know, troubled the social order, right? So they tell us so much about that particular moment in culture. So whether that's because you're a historian or because you want to know your enemy, I think as documents they're very important.
When we talk about canon, we're concerned about canon because we view it as being tremendously influential. And I think it may well be influential in the academy, but I don't think publishers think that much about the place of what they're publishing in the canon. There are probably exceptions, like George. George is an exception. And when I think about what's culturally influential, well, we're not in some sort of tug of war between books. The canon is Twitter. The canon is TikTok.
right.
It's a completely different cultural format which has supremacy in terms of cultural voice.
But kids are still learning certain books because of a canon in school.
Yes, precisely. Which is why, to me, it's more important than ever that what is taught in schools, that it reaches, that it touches. It can't just be what we who have read, you know, this number of books, whatever number it is, well, we think this is just so wonderful and awesome, you should read it. You know, if it doesn't relate to you, you don't really identify it, well, we don't really care because it's the best thing. No, I mean, if we want the existence of literature to be canonical in any way, what people read has to matter to them.
But if those things aren't taught in school, the children will never encounter them. Never encounter them. And having encountered them once, it's possible, you know, this second chance that you give a book, 10 years or 20 years, when they have children, the book will actually mean more to them.
Can I push back a little bit on that, Liz? Because I was sharing a story with you all before we started taping, and I said one of my favorite books was by Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Yes.
And I didn't study that in school. I found that book. So isn't there a way for people to find the books that they need?
Yeah.
What is there?
Because I wish that book
How did you find that book?
I think internet.
Fair enough. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I haunted the library as a kid. That's how I found books.
I think books are like ice cream. You know, if you like one ice cream flavor, you're probably going to try others. Now, you may like them more or less. You may discover that the 10th one is your absolute favorite. You know, but you have to land on some sort of ice cream that you like to try the next type of ice cream. So I think that in education, there has to be enough diversity. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be good. It should be good, wonderful books. But there are enough good, wonderful books which are historical, part of the canon, and which are modern, that we should be able to expose people to lots of flavors of ice cream.
Absolutely. And I just to piggyback off that point for a moment, I will say one thing in defense of the old-fashioned canon, which is that having been somebody who came through school systems where the idea of the great books was there in front of me, I do value the fact that I ended up reading works that I may not have read otherwise, that ended up speaking to me in very powerful ways. I remember grade 10, 15 years old, and doing Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's book. Exactly. And the teacher asked the group of us, I think 20 or so pupils in the class, who identifies with this book? I was the only one, put my hand up. Because I did identify with Holden Caulfield. I saw the adult world as being full of phonies, for crying out loud. And I was really pleased to come across a text that made that belief powerful and palpable for me. Validated it. Similarly for reading Titus Andronicus, right? And okay, Shakespeare, and it's kind of old-fashioned and old hat, Elizabethan English and all that. But when I come across the character of Aaron, the great villain, the alienated Black intellectual, that's who I needed Aaron. Aaron validated that for me, right? The sly, wicked, evil Black intellectual behind the power behind the throne. I said, I want to be that guy. I'm just kidding.
Thea, I saw you nodding.
I was just thinking about the fact that I think similar probably to all of us here, I read so many books as a child that weren't written for me at all. And nonetheless, I found something in them, you know, and they spoke to me. And in some ways that seems like the revenge, you know, of someone like me who's not someone who any of those canonized authors would ever have imagined is reading their works and connecting with them. It feels like a form of revenge to say, now this is mine.
Why is it revenge?
Because, like, for example, being mixed race, I'm somebody who wouldn't even be legal, you know, at the time when they were writing. You know, I'm a woman, I'm not really supposed to be able to read, you know? So taking that work and saying, now this is mine, I'm understanding something about the world. It's told me something about myself. It's given me, like, emotional comfort. That does feel, I don't know, maybe it's twisted, but to me it feels like a kind of revenge on someone who's not supposed to even be able to read or write, you know? Yeah.
George, did you want to read your poem?
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, great. All right. Thank you so much. This one is titled Onerous Canon, and it's dedicated for the late, great Derek Walcott. Imbibing libretti and bleak liqueur, I dread the dim shade of dour, spectral Yeats, and defrocked unsavory Pound who liked to put Negroes in lowercase in their place. For clarity and charity, I plumb John Clare, his sugar fire of port and rum, but shut away whiny, beseeching Keats, who should have drunk some Alexander Keats India Pale Ale. What can any late maker make of literature, painter? Oh, poet, I suspect you've ogled blues, golds, grays, adrift in a Venetian sky, gondola over sodden New Scotland and sink in muddy impressionism, gilt scuzzy water in tufted brown fields or gooey ice, drooling with too soon spring. What all our reading comes to, a canon of depression, sorry as January. Words should vacillate in lascivious postures or in notoriously incestuous rhyme. Poet, one great poem, that's all, but you never fail. Composing lines blustery yet tender. Your voice your own, Auden in the margins, Elliott, Yeats, and Pound in the dungeon. A veriloquous, unadulterated voice extracting black blues from a yellowed Oxford.
Okay. Keats wasn't so bad.
It's
I mean, he was dead at 23. Give him a break.
I like him. I use truth is beauty, beauty is truth all the time.
Well, and I agree.
Thank
Truth
you.
and beauty.
All right. Keats has a place in the poem.
Well, a kind of pallid place, you have to admit.
Well, he's a sort of pallid guy.
He wasn't a pallid guy. He was not pallid.
You're not going to be able to wrap this up.
I wrote a poem
Chairs are going to
for
come
him.
out.
So I like the guy. Don't worry.
But just to build on that, Liz, you know, and this is nothing against Keats. Are there? I'm just prefacing that. It's just coincidence. Are there some works that are revered that don't hold up today?
You know, I don't read them. If they don't hold up, I don't waste my time on them. You know, life is short, and I'm running out of time. So these days, the book has to be pretty damn good. And I reach into the past for some of the books that I have never read. Some of the Russians I've never read. You know, I don't want to be on my deathbed and thinking, God, why didn't I ever get to that?
If you were to give advice to anybody who's building a canon, what would that advice be? How should they build that canon?
Oh, not worry about it. Just read.
Just read?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the rest of you, Thea?
Do you mean somebody who's building a canon for schools? Yeah, well, I think, you know, being a little bit critical about what makes a canon what it is, you know, being able to understand what are the social forces that form it. And remembering that in our current climate, I think it's 80% of books go nowhere. Only 20% of books that are published actually find a readership. So isn't the job of someone who's doing that kind of archive work not only to find like the easy hits, but also to find books that were beautiful and meaningful and universal and timeless, and just because of whatever sort of random coincidences didn't necessarily find a large readership in their time, and to kind of recuperate them, which I feel like is what you're talking about with Fitzgerald.
You said only 20% reach readers.
Yes.
As a writer, that makes you feel what?
Terrible. Because I think one thing that you also realize is that both success and failure are extremely random and arbitrary. Plenty of books don't succeed because they weren't very good, but that doesn't mean that all books that don't succeed were bad. In fact, there's all sorts of, every single day, books are published that just don't wind up finding traction. Last year, I had the honor of sitting on the Governor General jury, so I read every book that was published in Canada, and there were so many that were just beautiful, wonderful books, people doing really exciting work, really interesting work, and just the nature of the market is that only, like, if we talk about the modern canon, like if we think about like the, books to read in the New York Times or the CBC, it's like maybe 20 books that get onto those lists. They're the same books over and over again. I find that really alarming. So I do feel like the job of anyone who's creating a canon is to attend to the nature of the industry, right? And to find people who were lost, to make sure, you got to have some of those people on there, Nietzsche, Orwell, Beckett, right? All those people, they sort of need to be on there because they did set the tone, right? They are seminal works. But what else is there that is missing, right? That would give us a fuller picture of what really happened back then.
We only have about 3 minutes left, but I want to hear from you, Vincent and George. So, Vincent.
Well, when I think about the concept of a personal canon, I think about the things that one would want on one's bookshelf in the last home in which one lives, the last room one inhabits, the books that one wants to have as friends when one considers what one has read. And so I think the only way to find that is to read with a sense of intentional vulnerability. And I think we read for many reasons, and that's fine. We read for entertainment, for escape, for all kinds of reasons. But I think if we're talking about a canon, we're talking about books that mean something in our lives. And for that to happen, we have to be open to being changed by the books. And that means we have to be vulnerable to what they have to say to us.
Is that what you mean by intentional vulnerability?
Yes, yes. Being open to the spirit of the book, the characters, the writer, not presuming that the book is going to make me feel a certain way or another way, but letting it happen.
What about you, George?
When I was 16, my mom was taking me driving me to high school in Halifax. And I was leafing through an anthology called Poetry of Our Time, published in 1966 and edited by Louis Dudek. And as I was leafing through it, I came across the section featuring Ezra Pound. And I happened to read his reworking translation of the Chinese Tang Dynasty poet Li Po's poem, A Song of Chen Can, which Pound retitled The River Merchant's Wife, a Letter.
Yes.
And as I read that poem in the back of my mom's car, I suddenly felt I was hearing Mississippi blues all the way from 1,000 years before, from 800, 900 AD. And I knew I wanted to write like that. I wanted to get to that kind of level. And so I started to read Pound. And as I read Pound, I discovered that he had fascist sympathies. I discovered that he was anti-Semitic. I discovered that he was sexist, racist in general, imperialistic, all kinds of negatives. But I kept going back. I kept reading. I remember reading the cantos.
Why did you keep going back?
Because there was something compelling about this difficult character.
Yes, and that's a fabulous,
Yeah.
River Merchant's daughter?
Yeah, the River Merchant's wife. Yeah.
River Merchant's wife.
A letter.
Fantastic.
And I really found it very compelling. And even though I can and I do loathe the politics, this is the gentleman who created, really, practically by himself, modern poetry in English. And so I knew I had to.
Allen Ginsberg forgave him.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Yes.
That's right. He went to visit him in St. Elizabeth's when he was incarcerated there. But to get to the point of this anecdote, continuing to read Pound and reading. I remember reading the Cantos is all about the conspiracy between arms merchants and bankers to always be sending people off to war to die. That's Pound's thesis in the Cantos, the governing thesis of that massive poem, long poem, epic poem of his. And I remember reading it, standing in line in the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, and I'm reading Pound, the Cantos. Holy smokes, this is great. What a thrill it was. But to get to the point of the anecdote, reading Pound and consistently reading Pound meant I had to go and read Dante, which I did in English. It also meant that I became more familiar with Italian literature in general in translation. But then that brought me to the world, Vincent, of Italian pop music of the 1960s. And how wonderful it is. We're crying out loud, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha everywhere. Italian jazz. And so just following that one writer opened up so many other avenues of exploration for me in terms of literature, in terms of art, in terms of music, and so on. And I gotta say this, I gotta end myself by just saying this, that in the end, and I think this is true for all writers, not just poets, but particularly for poets, in the end, we are servants to the art. We are servants to the muse. We are servants to the art. The art must always come first, no matter what. And if, in fact, we follow that muse, if, in fact, we follow that art, we will end up creating glorious works. No matter how the world may receive them, they will be glorious because they will be imbued with all of our love, all of our passion, all of our affection will be there. And some people will find it. Some will find it and revel in it and feel more alive because of their encounter with those works. And yes, there will be those who will come to suppress and repress and so on. And guess what? They'll end up in Dante's Inferno.
I mean, this is a phenomenal way to end our week together. I can't begin to say thank you so much for being so generous with your answers. It just feels the passion and the commitment to your craft. It's been such a gift to have this time with you. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Our guests all this week were George Elliott Clarke, author of many books, including Where Beauty Survived, an Africadian memoir. Dr. Vincent Lam, whose new novel is On the Ravine. Elizabeth Hay, author of the just published novel Snow Road Station. And Thea Lim, author most recently of An Ocean of Minutes. Next week, we'll get Summer serious about food.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
One of the reasons why I love Los Angeles, it's got the world's biggest problems.
Michael Colville